Well, this is Shay Weber, and my first article analysis is on an article entitled Teachers' Beliefs About Using a Professional Development Plan. And as I was looking through articles, this one really jumped out at me because, we read these studies, stating what's effective and what's not, and how they came to that conclusion, and how great professional development plans are. But and we never really see what a teacher thinks about them. And it's important because as someone who wants to be an administrator one day, I think you really need to take into account your staff and what they think about what you're trying to institute, because everybody needs a shared understanding to become effective. This I relate this a lot to my military experience, as someone who, if you're a leader of a platoon, you need your squads, and they need their teams. Everyone needs to understand what your intent is and what your mission is, and everyone needs to be on the same page and have a shared understanding to complete that mission and to be effective. So uh, I think about this in the same way as that. So this article started. Well, I guess let me talk about the purpose. Um, the purpose of the article was to ask the question, are professional development plans effective, or at least as effective as we're led to believe? So when I saw this article, I thought to myself, that there's a gap between what administrators and districts want and what an educator thinks is effective for them. And by reading this article, it was useful to try to bridge that gap, and um, try to discuss buy-in of the staff, and to try to figure out, as an administrator, what are the things you can do to gain that support from your staff, and not just hit them with a professional development plan, but what are some ways that you can institute that they will value as your employees. So the introduction of the article basically stated that professional development plans were recently introduced in Dutch schools. Um, and what I thought was really interesting in that introduction, and to me it summed up the entire article really, and it really played into the conclusion, was that um, you know, the effectiveness of a professional development plan relies solely on the perception of the plan by the user. So, how that staff member, how that teacher, how they perceive the plan that you're trying to institute is going to determine the effectiveness of that plan. Um, and it stated that in this study, most teachers had a positive view of those professional development plans, but there were second and third order effects that ultimately led to the failure of some of those plans. And generally speaking, that's things like their already heavy workload. So those are things that, as an administrator, you can take into account whenever you want to try to institute something like that. So I guess my view about a professional development plan after reading the introduction is that just by virtue of being a self-reflection, uh, in a sense, it's effective. So I think staff members, everybody from a superintendent to a teacher, just the whole educational process really relies on self-reflection. What did I do today? What did I do good? What did I do bad? What can I do better? How did those kids receive my lesson? Um, am I being effective? Am I building relationships? So all these things need to be considered, and a professional development plan really is just a reflection. Um, so I think the first thing that an administrator needs to understand, and I think if you are already an educator who becomes an administrator, you have an understanding of this, that your staff is under stress and heavy workloads, especially now with high stakes testing and all those things. that a professional development plan, I don't think, can just be developed in a short amount of time. To me, a professional development plan needs to be developed over a longer period, like maybe even a year. Because as you look back on your prior year's experience, uh, and you take into account those experiences into your professional development plan, uh, you miss key details over time. And I think that as you go throughout the year, you can pull fresh experiences and fresh reflections and put it into your professional development plan and kind of cross level it with your maybe your building improvement plan or whatever your goals are, your school, your vision statement. You can incorporate that all in together over the course of a year and make a fresh document instead of trying to recall things that might not even be accurate, and they might be from students that almost a generational difference. So that's important to understand as well. So I think also if you were to do it over a longer span of time, you're going to take that stress of this is what I need to do immediately. You're going to take that stress off, and people would actually put genuine thought into it. So I am a believer in purpose and guidelines for everything I do. In my own classroom, I tell my students, at every lesson, here's our purpose. Um, here's why I want you to do this, and here's why we're doing this together. And I think so often, you know, the districts don't tell us, or the administration doesn't tell us, the purpose and guidelines for what we're doing. I think back to my first years teaching, and we had PD days, and we had PLC time, and nobody really knew what this meant because there was never a guideline or a handbook telling you how to PLC or how to PD. So oftentimes it just became a joke, and it just wasted time, and there was no real purpose to it. So I think if a purpose and a guideline is given to a professional development plan, it's going to be perceived better by your staff. Um, in the article, Imhoff and Picard said that if an individual thinks that the professional development plan is for promotion as opposed to professional growth, it can prevent them from reflecting critically on their performance and mentioning opportunities for learning. So, when you're giving when you're given the possibility of a raise or the possibility of a promotion, you need to self promote. And generally, when people want to self promote, they're not going to mention areas of improvement. And so I think a professional development plan needs to be separate from incentives, because a professional development plan is just a self reflection, and it's it's a list of goals and how you can achieve them. Uh, so I definitely think having purpose and guidelines is absolutely vital whenever you want to institute anything as an administrator. So overall, my interpretation of this article is that you need teacher buy-in, and in order to get teacher buy-in, you need to truly discuss, what is what is the purpose of what we're doing, and why should we value it. And once you establish that, and you begin to get that teacher buy-in by giving purposes and guidelines, um, now they have a roadmap to get where they need to go. And so now you're valuing their time, and really what you're doing, going back to our beginning, in our introduction, is you're bridging that gap, and ultimately, um, I think you're making a more effective classroom, because I do believe a professional development plan can be useful, and it can be effective. It just needs to be implemented correctly. Um, Thank you.